Welcome back everybody, and yes, I'm standing again. In the last video, choosing a class, we laid down the basic rules we're going to follow for eliminating them, and we're going to do that tomorrow. We're going to do it in a very quick way. I really don't want you guys spending hours and hours laboring over what this choice should be. You should be able to decide it pretty quickly by getting rid of all the fluff. So, before we get there, a lot of people had one big question. What is a moment of glory? It's not that easy to describe, and I bet you've never even really heard of it before unless you've been a member of this community for quite a long time. It's something that's different for everybody. So what I'm going to do is try and explain it to you in this video, and then when you go into it you can look at the classes and see whether that potential is there. But you should also be aware, not every class is even capable of having one of these things. Alright guys? So let's get into it and hopefully I can define it in some way for you.
Is a moment of glory important to have in the first place? I truly believe so. If your class or spec doesn't occasionally fill you with joy or satisfaction in some way, then without question the other classes around you are going to start looking real tempting real quick. That certainly doesn't mean that you should dwell on the issue. If you are interested in some specs, then please use the PTR to try them out and make up your own mind. A moment of glory is just that. Something that only your spec is capable of that simply makes you feel great about being your class. It could give you that fuck yeah feeling or just leave you with that lasting sensation of that was so cool what I did last night. Some examples then. In a simple way, a Recklessness or Battlecry Bladestorm by a warrior definitely carries that kind of feeling for many. If you're a more casual player, and I really mean that in the literal sense, something like this can be more than enough to qualify. On the other side though, if you are a more regular player, all the way from playing for a few days a week to every night, then that combo that you can do every few minutes is going to lose its charm rather quickly. In that case, perhaps the more complex the setup, the better. Maybe even to the extreme of something you can only possibly do once or twice a week at best, and only when the game's conditions allow it. An example of this could be a WoD Demoloc's ability to devastate an enormous area in a way no other class could. Setting this up, however, requires proper pet positioning and a 7 to 8 step process of abilities, along with managing timers of the boss and personals. That level of complexity, while not difficult to the experienced player, is interesting, and the reward for successfully pulling it off, well, that's going to make it to something to look forward to each week. Similarly, with the WoD Combat Rogue that I played, aligning Deep Insight perfectly, getting the killing spree ready, trinket cooldown, internal cooldowns for the exact moment Operator Thogar Mythic opened his train doors is always a sight I look forward to. Perhaps what I've just discussed goes some way to explaining why I was disheartened with the changes to several classes in Legion that had purposefully had their potential for momentary greatness taken away. A good example of this would be the Fire Mage. Without the scaling combustion, those ridiculous combustion spreads skyrocketing the deeps as the pyroblasts all flow like water is great, until it just becomes standard like in Legion. At this point you might be thinking that this is limited to DPS only. There is some level of truth to that, as having exceptional moments as a healer or a tank, at least in the PvE world, often requires the failure of others in order to provide the opportunity. A good tank will recognise wipe-causing dangers early and react to them. If you had the good fortune to see a nightmare situation occurring and then start issuing orders for DPS to taunt at a specific time or reposition the entire raid rescuing the scenario, similarly with healers. Seasoned healers will know those moments where you are left with making the decision of who lives or who dies to give the best chance of finishing those last few percentages. Those are your moments, and thankfully they're not really class specific. I mentioned some classes aren't capable of achieving these moments. Legion has taken steps across the board to stop players being able to create absurd results. This is good for the game overall, despite it sounding absolutely awful. Classes capable of absurdity are also open to stacking and abuse on the more difficult encounters the game throws at players. Every single class in the game right now is capable of regular bursts of fun on par with a Recklessness Bladestorm. But for the more enthusiastic players, for the more hardcore players, I can recommend some of the specs that I've played that have really given those high class moments. Shadow Priests, Windwalkers, Mages, Locks, DKs and the Shaman as having the greater chance of glorious moments so far. As we come to the end of this video, please don't take this as the other classes that I haven't mentioned being terrible or anything like that. I just haven't had any really rare standout moments with them on par with the mentioned specs. They're fine. They're just not giving me that that was good. That feeling that I think everyone should strive for in some form or another.